Welcome back to Planet Doug Behind the Scenes Studios. And the BTS studio at the moment is also room 7 up on the 3rd floor of the Rosa Hotel, or something like that. The name of this hotel is a little bit of a mystery to me because there seem to be 3 different Rosa hotels, and I booked a room at one of them, the G Rosa, and then the owner contacted me. As soon as I made the booking through Agoda. Everything seemed fine. I chose the G Rosa because of its location and other reasons. And then I instantly got an email through the Agoda system saying, oh, we're sorry, but that hotel isn't available. It's under repair right now. However, I can put you up at a different hotel, and it's actually a nicer hotel with a better room, but I will give it to you at the price you paid for the G Rosa. And then we messaged back and forth, and I said, oh, that sounds pretty good. Let's do that. But he didn't actually tell me what hotel it was, like the name of it. And I had a vague idea of where it might be, but on the Google Maps, there were 2 Rosa hotels. One was like called the Rosa Hotel, and then the other one was like the Rosa Hotel. I couldn't make any sense of it. And then even when I finally figured out, I was pretty sure which one it was, and I walked there to here yesterday, and on the outside of the building, they had names of the hotels, of this hotel, but even that name that was on the building was different from all 3 of them. So I was like, I have no idea what's going on. And when I moved into this hotel yesterday, there was a big thunderstorm moving in, and I knew the rain was coming, and it was going to be very, very close. I was hoping this was the right hotel. And then I sent more messages, and I eventually found out. I told the guy what I was looking at. I sent him a message. I couldn't send him a photo or anything through the Agoda system, but I wrote out, I think I'm standing in front of your hotel, because he wasn't here, obviously. He was somewhere else entirely. I don't know where. I don't even know who I was talking to. But I said, I'm standing in front of what I think is the right Rosa Hotel, and it says this on the front, and there's another sign over here that says Coffee Rosa, and there's another sign over here that says this Rosa. So that's where I am. And then he wrote back and says, yeah, that's the place, and your room is available. And as soon as I walked into the lobby, just the rain just came thundering down. So it was pretty good timing. However, after all of that, I don't know where I am. I keep trying to think of the name of the hotel, and I can't come up with it. But that is where Planet Doug Studios is taking place right now. I'm on my bed in my hotel room, and I have the camera, a GoPro, set up on a chair, and the chair is sitting on the bed. Just because of the way this room is designed, there is no other way to mount a camera. And I'm having a cup of coffee and recording this video because my laptop is right over there. And my laptop is busy exporting another behind-the-scenes video. But for that behind-the-scenes video, I had the poor judgment of shooting it in 4K. And because it's in 4K, when I first started the export job, I finished the video, and then I hit export, and it said, according to DaVinci Resolve, it was going to take 2 days, 3 hours to finish exporting the video because it is a 4K video, and it's a very long one. And I knew that it wouldn't actually take that long, but it eventually came down. It kept saying, started at 2 days and 3 hours, but then it got through the beginning of the video where there's a lot of text, and text goes really slow in video for some reason. But when it got beyond the text, I saw the time estimates start to drop, and it went down from, the starting point was 51 hours, and then it went down to 40 hours, then 30 hours, then 20 hours. And I went out into the city today, and I had lunch, and I did some shopping. Luckily, this hotel room is a more old-fashioned one, so it doesn't have the key card to operate the power. Because that's a big problem at a lot of hotels these days, for me in particular, that when you leave the room, you have to take your key card with you, of course, otherwise you can't get back in. But when you remove your key card, it turns off the power. So then my laptop can't operate anymore because it needs to be plugged in all the time. And if I happen to be charging phones, charging GoPro batteries, charging microphones, all of the charging stops dead because there's no electricity in the room anymore. That's kind of a problem for me. But in this room, it's a bit more old-fashioned, so you just have a key to the door, and then when you go out, all the power stays on. So I went out shopping and got lunch, and when I came back, my laptop luckily was still churning away, still exporting the video. And let me check right now to see how much time is left. 8 hours. It's going to take, and I think that's the true time now. It's already been exporting for, oh man, how long has it been? 7 hours. So it's been exporting for 7 hours, and it's going to export for another 8 hours. So basically, yeah, 15 hours, the entire day and into the night to finish exporting. So that's, if anyone ever asks, hey, why don't you shoot in 4K? That is why you don't shoot in 4K. It's just a brutal format. Anyway, this video is being shot in 1080p. Man, I want to shoot it in 480p just to make it as easy as possible. Anyway, so while that is going, I can't edit any other videos. I can't use my laptop until it's done. So I have some time on my hands, and I don't have any memory left either, because I've been shooting so much video and sort of stockpiling raw video. Everything I own is full. Every piece of memory I have is full of video files. And so I can't even shoot new video, even if I wanted to. I've got nowhere to store it, unless I go shopping and buy new mega terabyte hard drives or something. Yeah, so that's my life right now in terms of technology. Coffee is good though. Nescafe Gold. Yeah, it's very, very good. So I'm going to start today's behind the scenes video again by going back in time, and I want to tell the story of one of my video experiences shooting video back in Saigon, because as I said, I'm here in Dalat. I was in Saigon, then I went to a city called Canton, and then I went from Canton back to Saigon, from Saigon up here to Dalat, and now I'm going back in time to Saigon. And on this particular day, the project for the day was to go to the Independence Palace. And the Independence Palace is one of the big tourist attractions in Saigon. And I didn't know anything about it. In fact, the day that I went there, I didn't even plan on visiting it. I had plans in the morning to meet a friend for coffee, and I walked to the coffee shop. So I'm walking to the coffee shop to meet up with my friend. We had a set time in the morning to do that. And on the way, on my left, I saw this big, beautiful park. But I wasn't quite sure if it was a real park because it was surrounded by a high cement wall with iron bars on the top. Like all the other parks that I've seen here, the public parks, they're open. They're public parks where anybody can go in, so they're not sealed off. But this one had a high wall all the way around it, and it looked to be really large. So as I was walking along, I was peering through the bars of the fence, looking around, going, I wonder what this is. I wonder what this is. I have no idea what it is. At the time, I was moving pretty fast because I had to meet my friend at a certain time. So I didn't stop and check Google Maps or anything like that. I was just looking at the place. But then I came all the way around to the front. And then at the front, the penny dropped because I recognized it. And there was a big front gate, and there was a ticket booth, tons and tons of tourist buses. Obviously, this was a tourist attraction. I went, that's the Independence Palace. That's what that is. That's what's inside this big wall, the walled-in park. It's the Independence Palace. So I thought, well, since I'm already here, I'm in the neighborhood, I'm meeting my friend for coffee, but the coffee shop was right there. So I thought, okay, after I'm finished with coffee with my friend, I will go check out the Independence Palace. And because it was a bit of a spur of the moment thing, I didn't know a lot about it in advance. I didn't read up on it. I didn't have any facts or figures in my brain. And talking to you today, to be honest, I think a lot of the facts and figures are gone, so I probably won't be able to speak in too much detail, though I will be referencing some photographs that I took of the place, and as well as some signs, and I might read from a few things just to fill in the gaps in my knowledge, things that I've already forgotten that I think are quite interesting. So, yeah, but I figured it's a museum, essentially, and if you go to a museum, the museum's job is to tell you things. So even though I didn't really know about the Independence Palace, I thought, well, I'll go in there, I'll buy the ticket, I'll go in, and as I look at the exhibits, well, I will learn about what it is. So I figured it would be okay, even though I didn't do any research beforehand. So I started at the front, I got my tickets. Turns out it was tickets, because there were two things going on in there. There was the Independence Palace, the giant building itself, but there was another building, and in the second building was another exhibit. And you got a ticket for each. I think it was $40,000 for the Independence Palace and $25,000 for the other exhibit. And the other exhibit was fascinating. It was just as interesting as the main Independence Palace. So it was a very interesting day for me, and I spent a lot of time there. So the basic idea is that we've got the Independence Palace, and this one was designed by a Vietnamese architect, an award-winning Vietnamese architect, and it was built to replace the previous palace, which had been badly damaged by bombs that had, because at this time, in terms of history, forgive me if I'm getting some of these facts wrong, but at this point, we're just after the war, the Indochina War with the French. And we had the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, which was the final nail in the coffin of the French in Indochina. They lost that battle to the Viet Minh. And then there was the Geneva Conference, where all the major powers got involved and decided what to do with Indochina. And the Viet Minh had some leverage at this conference because they had just defeated the French and at Dien Bien Phu. And out of the Geneva Conference came this idea of dividing Vietnam into North and South. The North under the control of the Viet Minh, North Vietnam, and then South Vietnam, which I believe was called the Republic of Vietnam. And it's a very complex period of history for Vietnam and for South Vietnam in particular. So the Republic of Vietnam, the leader was a guy whose name I can't pronounce. I've called it up on Google Translate and played the audio, but the words, it's the guy, his name is D-I-E-M, but they always pronounce it like Zim or something like that. I always say DM because I see the letter D, the first letter in my name, Doug. I see D-I-E-M. It's just instinctive. I say, well, that's DM, Dim or DM, but it's kind of like Ziem, or they say it many different ways. Anyway.
Ngô Đình Diệm. Ngô Đình Diệm.
So he was the leader of South Vietnam, the Republic of Vietnam, and they have this palace then, but it was bombed and was so badly damaged that he decided to just build a brand new palace. So the old one was a French, like a classic French colonial building. For my money, on the outside, much more beautiful than the new one. The Vietnamese, the one that was designed by the Vietnamese architect. I'll talk about this a bit more in a minute. But the original palace was French colonial in design. So on the outside, it was quite ornate, had a lot of design elements on the outside. But the new one that it was built to replace it, designed by this Vietnamese architect, was quite plain on the outside, in my opinion. It was basically just a big cement block, like a rectangle, without much decor on the outside. But you really appreciated the architecture and the design when he went on the inside. So the outside, as I said, was sort of a rectangular block without a whole lot of design elements, but the inside was fabulous. So it was the, maybe I'll read from a note from Wikipedia. Basically it says, the Independence Palace, also publicly known as the Reunification Convention Hall, is a landmark in Ho Chi Minh City. It was designed by architect Ngo Viet Thu and was the home and workplace of the President of the Republic of Vietnam. This was really important. It was the site of the fall of Saigon on April 30th, 1975, that ended the Vietnam War when a North Vietnamese army tank crashed through its gates. So it has a powerful symbolic meaning, this palace, because it was the seat of government. It was the home and the workplace of the president of South Vietnam. And during the fall of Saigon, April 30th, 1975, we all know that date because there's the very famous photograph of the helicopters on the roof of a building. And there's, I think it's always described as like CIA agents are escorting American citizens onto the helicopter because they're all fleeing from Saigon because the city has fallen to the North Vietnamese forces. And on this date, April 30th, they approached the Independence Palace and a North Vietnamese tank crashed through the front gates. And there's photographs of that event. And that symbolized the final defeat of South Vietnam and then the reunification of the country. North and South had been reunited under the communist North. So this Independence Palace is a very important place. And the inside, as I said, was a revelation. It was a beautiful building, absolutely gorgeous on the inside, high ceilings everywhere, very airy. So many of the rooms, this is what I noted in particular, were open on one side and also open on the other side with these tall pillars with openings in between them. And then wind, a cool breeze would blow right through the building. So all of the rooms, these huge conference rooms, meeting rooms for the president, the vice president, for larger groups. Each room was very large, very ornate with the furniture on the inside. And then it all felt very cool and very airy because it had this cross breeze going through all of the floors, through all of the rooms. And the furniture itself was kind of astounding to see for me because it seemed to be, we would think of it today as vintage furniture. It was a treasure trove of vintage style from, say, the 50s and 60s and 70s. And one thing that really struck me, though, was the place was in such good condition. You would think furniture that old, this is the kind of furniture you would find in a used furniture shop in the United States, and they're charging thousands of dollars for an armchair just because of its vintage quality. But it would look used, it would look worn, and yet all of this furniture and the carpets and the tables and the lamps and the curtains, the artwork, everything in this Independence Palace looked in absolutely mint condition. So that's what really jumped out at me when I went through the place. And I went through every single room from floor to floor to floor. And as I said, you got to see all the big conference rooms and the meeting rooms. They had a private movie theater, which was fascinating to see. They had like bunkers down in the lower basement floors with shooting ranges for practicing. There was a helicopter pad on the outside in case the president had to make a speedy getaway. So it had a helicopter pad there. And this palace, the new one, had also been bombed. There were 2 pilots from the north who infiltrated the south. So they were actually in the South Vietnamese Air Force, but they were secret agents of the North, and they were cooking up this plan to do something, and I guess their plan was to bomb the palace of the president. And on one of their days where they had access to planes with bombs in them, rather than carrying out the mission that they were assigned, they flew over the new presidential palace and dropped their bombs to destroy it. But apparently those bombs, they did hit. They were accurate, and they hit it kind of near the helicopter pad. I think one of the bombs fell there, but they didn't really do any damage. So even though it was bombed by the North Vietnamese, it didn't actually damage very much. And one interesting bit of history about this building is that it was commissioned by the president of South Vietnam, this man Diem, and he commissioned to have it built, but he never lived to see it completed because there was a coup, and then he and his brothers, maybe one of his brothers, maybe it was just him and one brother, they were both assassinated during the coup, and then he never lived to see the palace completed or to ever live in it. And his successor, some general that took over South Vietnam after him, he ended up taking over and perhaps living in the palace. But the guy who had it built, he never saw it completed. It's just kind of an interesting story. Yeah, so I enjoyed my visit to the Independence Palace very much. Beautiful grounds, manicured green lawns with fountains, trees everywhere, an expansive landscape around it, very large park surrounding the palace, and there were a variety of military vehicles on display, as you might expect, tanks and jet fighters and things like that. So it's a beautiful building to explore, the building and the grounds, all of that. And then after I toured that building, and I recommend it highly, anyone visiting Saigon, if you're not really that into history and you have more pleasurable things on your mind and you want to go do something else, I'd go do those things. But if you are like me and if you do enjoy museums and a little bit of history and that sort of thing, I recommend it highly. Very interesting place to visit. And then after I left the Independence Palace, I stayed on the grounds and I went to the second exhibit, the one that I mentioned already. You got 2 tickets, $40,000 for the Independence Palace, $25,000 for this other exhibit. And it was a very, very interesting exhibit. And when you go in, there was a sign telling you what this exhibit was about. And I just want to read that to you so we're up to speed on what goes on here. The sign said, "In this exhibit, you will be introduced to the French and Vietnamese leaders who lived in the old palace, along with many other prominent figures in the history of Saigon and southern Vietnam. You will learn about the civilizing mission of the French colonial state and the dramatic changes in transportation, architecture, commerce, and social life in Saigon during the colonial era. You will also learn about the rise and fall of Diem, who was ousted and killed in a coup in 1963. Our exhibit is designed to be interactive. In addition to seeing and listening, we invite you to examine and explore the images, documents, and artifacts we have collected. Along the way, we hope that you will gain some new perspective and insight into the history of this important place in the heart of Ho Chi Minh City." So that is where I went. And I think the old palace was called Din Norodom. So that was the original palace called Din Norodom. And it was, as I said, badly damaged. And then the leader, Diem, commissioned the construction of a new palace. So in this exhibit, it's a beautiful old building as well, with many rooms and floors, things like that. The building itself is worth the price of admission. But what I saw there was you learn 2 things, and it filled in a huge knowledge gap for me, because to be honest, this era of South Vietnam is a bit mysterious to me. Who was in charge at that time? Of course, from the North Vietnamese point of view, they just talk about the Americans all the time, the Americans and the French. And they seem to sort of dismiss the South Vietnamese as any kind of a legitimate authority. They just call them the puppets of the Americans. But Again, no historian here, no expert, but when you dive into this and start reading about it, it seems like it was a lot more complicated than that. And you see that here because in this exhibit there was the history of Diem's family. And I didn't know any of this, or if I ever knew it, I've forgotten about it. So I read through all the exhibits. So what I normally do at one of these things, I went through with my GoPro as much as I could. I couldn't get very far though, because I was taking video at the beginning, and then the woman who was running the place saw me, came up to me and said, nah, you can't shoot video in here. So I had to shut down my GoPro. But I did go through the whole thing, just documenting and recording everything that I could, reading everything for the first time, taking video, taking pictures, lots and lots and lots of pictures, since I couldn't take video anymore. And then I went through the whole thing a second time, much more slowly, and read every single poster I could, trying to put all the information in my brain. And then I went through it a third time, reading everything again, because it was like, oh, now okay, that's what that means. I was connecting things together. And then in this one room, they had exhibits that were like video exhibits with headphones there. So you could sit on a bench, put on headphones. Some of the headphones had Vietnamese, some English, and then on the opposite wall would be projected a video or graphics or still images, just giving you the history of the city of Saigon in particular, and the society and culture of Vietnam, and just how it changed over the years. And they had 4 different exhibits, one on each wall. So I would sit on this side of the wall on a bench, put on the headphones, and I'm watching the exhibit being projected onto the opposite wall. And then when that show was over, I would just get up, walk across to the other side, turn around, sit on that bench, put on the headphones, and then I'd watch the exhibit being projected on the wall that used to be above me. And then I'd go to the next one, watch that exhibit, change sides, and then watch that exhibit. And there are 4 different movies concentrating on different aspects of life and society in Vietnam throughout the colonial period and then the modern period, and a lot of images of the city itself and the changes over time, the construction of the buildings and the road systems and the markets, the buying and the selling, all the commercial activity, the roads that the French built, and then the canal system and the French filling in the canals and making walking streets and wide boulevards. So really a ton of fascinating information. So I enjoyed that a lot. So that was one side of this exhibit. The other side was all about the Diem family and when they were in charge of South Vietnam. And that, I didn't know any of this, so I found that quite interesting as well. So here's a little bit about him, about Diem. When he became Prime Minister of South Vietnam in the summer of 1954, Diem faced a daunting array of opponents. The South Vietnamese army was under the control of General Nguyen Van Hin, who openly boasted of his plans to overthrow Diem. Much of Saigon was dominated by the Binh Xuyen, a criminal cartel led by a former river pirate named Le Van Vien, or Bay Vien. Meanwhile, large parts of the countryside were under the control of militia forces linked to the Cao Dai and Hao religious communities. So like that to me is really fascinating, because when you get the thumbnail sketch of the Vietnam War, for example, and then you've got the Americans cast as the evil people, the bad guys, and then as the invaders of Vietnam, and then the South Vietnamese government were just dismissed as the puppets of the Americans. But there was a lot going on with the government of South Vietnam, as this was talking about. So he was appointed as prime minister, but he had almost no control at that time because of all these other powerful groups, and control of South Vietnam was just fragmented. You know, criminal cartels, the army, everybody was jockeying for power at that time. And then it says, over the next year, Diem used a combination of negotiation, bribery, deception, and military force to overcome these rivals. After forcing General Hin to go into foreign exile, he gained the support of key Hao Hao and Cao Dai commanders, and then defeated the Bin Zhu Yan in a showdown battle in the streets of Saigon. By 1956, Diem had consolidated his authority and appeared to be in firm control of all of South Vietnam. So that alone was sort of an eye-opening set of facts to learn. And then the other thing I learned about him and the way he maintained control, a lot of it was because he relied on his brothers. And they had a whole room with photographs of the Diem family. And the reason he had so much success was because he could rely on his family members. They were loyal to him. I guess he had 4 brothers, at least, maybe 5, I think 4 brothers. And he basically assigned roles in the government to all 4 of his brothers. Put one brother in charge of this, another brother in charge of that, the third brother here. And so it was basically the country was being run by the Diem family. And they retained very strong control because of that, because it was a family and they were not fighting against each other. And apparently he developed because he had to fight so much to stay in power, had to fight so many groups, there was so much opposition that over time he developed a very powerful security apparatus, police and secret police and military this. And I guess that was sort of the beginning of his downfall, because his security and military and police presence was so heavy-handed that the local people in South Vietnam started to resent that. It was getting way too authoritative, and then he started to lose control, and there was a lot of discontent. And that was one element to where the discontent was coming from, because he was ruling with a very heavy-handed police and military presence. Even, I mean, technically it was supposed to be a democratic government that was elected democratically, but he was kind of ruling the South with force, using police and secret service and military and all that kind of thing. So anyway, I read all through that, and then all this mention of a pirate was in charge of the criminal cartel, like a river pirate. Seemed like a very kind of romantic language being described, being used to describe this period of history. And I found all of that, fascinating. So yeah, I enjoyed visiting the Independence Palace and then going to this other exhibit. I don't know how long that exhibit is going to be around. I don't know if it's a permanent one or whether it's going to be replaced with something else. It looked pretty permanent to me. But again, I would recommend going to both. And then right on the grounds of the Independence Palace, there's also a very nice coffee shop, outdoor coffee shop. I think it was called the April 30th coffee shop. And I remember seeing the date April 30th all the time. And I didn't know why that date was significant, but now I learned, because that was the date. April 30th, 1975 was the fall of Saigon and the final victory of the North over the South and the reunification of the country. So it is the April 30th cafe. And so I went in there and I had some kind of a shake, mango smoothie, whatever smoothie I could get. I got the smoothie, big fan of smoothies. And I got a hamburger of some kind there. They had kind of a Western style menu as well. So like you could get a banh mi there, but I got this burger and a smoothie, and just sat there for a while thinking about everything I'd read at this exhibit and at the Independence Palace. I don't know if you want to hear me reading more signs from the museum, but I find this really interesting stuff. It helps put Vietnam in perspective, to have some of these ideas rumbling around in your brain. So this was a poster describing the new palace and the old palace. So here it is, building a new palace. They're talking about the Independence Palace, the new one. And it says, Bombed during the attempted coup on February 27, 1962, Independence Palace was so badly damaged that President Norodom decided to have it completely rebuilt. The replacement palace was designed by the architect No Viet Thu, the first Vietnamese to win the Grand Prix de Rome. A central feature of his design was the harmonious combination of modern European architectural elements with traditional Asian architecture. Construction of the new palace began on July 1st, 1962. However, due to the assassination of the No Dinh Diem brothers on November 2nd, 1963, the work was delayed and could not be completed until October 31st, 1966. In October 1967, Nguyen Van Thu became the president of the Republic of Vietnam. From that date, the new Independence Palace was the headquarters of the Republic of Vietnam government and also served as the home of Nguyen Van Thu's family until the end of April 1975. And then getting back to what I was talking about, Diem and his brothers ruling the country together, they had a whole thing here describing this. And it's called, so there's the sign from the museum. It says, family rule. When Diem assumed power in Saigon in 1954, the authority of his government was tenuous or non-existent in many parts of South Vietnam. Many rival leaders and groups viewed him with suspicion or hostility. Almost no one expected him to remain in power very long. But Diem defied these expectations. In the first years of his rule, Diem outmaneuvered and defeated several of the groups that opposed his rule. He also removed ex-Emperor Bao Dai from office and established a new state known as the Republic of Vietnam with himself as president. Diem held elections for South Vietnamese National Assembly and wrote a new constitution. In addition, he and his advisors drew up elaborate plans to develop the southern countryside and mobilize the support of the rural population. At the same time, his government built an elaborate security apparatus that included the army, police, and intelligence agencies. In building the new state and increasing his personal authority, Diem relied heavily on his family members, especially his 4 brothers, each of whom had his own power base in South Vietnam. His sister-in-law, Tran Le Xuan, better known as Madame Nu, also participated in the activities of the government. For many Southern Vietnamese, family rule became a defining feature of the Diem government. And then there's a photograph of all of the family members and a description of their role in the government and the positions they held and the powers that they had. So, yeah. Fascinating stuff, absolutely fascinating. And within this exhibit, there's all that politics, the history, but again, all the history of Saigon itself as a city. And you show its growth over time. And there's one room there that was quite fascinating. It was basically built to look like a cafe from that period. So it had all of the like period furniture and food and drinks and posters on the wall and things like that. And there was information there about all these Vietnamese movie stars. These beautiful young women had photos all over the wall, and I guess they were all the stars of that day. And that was a very interesting room to visit as well. And then when there were exhibits talking about some of the military campaigns, the fall of Saigon, like the battle for Saigon, things like that, the exhibits had sound effects. You could hear the artillery fire and the shooting and helicopter sounds and jet sounds and things like that. So very interesting. So basically what I'm saying is, if you go to the Independence Palace, you definitely should also go to this other building. Set aside some time for that. I would say equal time between the two buildings. because you could spend a long time here absorbing all of that information. So yeah, that was my day at the Independence Palace, and I haven't edited that video yet. I hope to be doing that very soon, but I can't start on it until until my laptop finishes this export job. Let's see, how many hours are left? Yeah, you might as well count it in days because it's still got 6.5 hours to go. So all of today will be required just to export that one video. So very, very ridiculous. I will never shoot a behind the scenes video in 4K again. It's just too much. 1080p will have to do. The day after I went to the Independence Palace, I went to yet another museum. And I think this was the last museum I visited in Saigon. I think so. I think this is the last one I went to. And I liked it very much as well. This one is called the Museum of Ho Chi Minh City. And this is the one I talked about before when I went to another museum, had a similar name, but it was about the history of Vietnam. This one, Museum of Ho Chi Minh City, is much more about exactly what it says, the city, Ho Chi Minh City itself. It focuses a lot more on the history of Saigon itself. And it did something that I talked about. When I went to the History Museum and I gave my conclusions about that museum, one of the things I said is that a museum like that focuses very much on just the governments and the military activities, who's in charge of the country or who's in charge of this piece of land until invaders come in and take over. Now who's in charge, and then there's a revolution against those invaders, they're kicked out, someone else is in charge. It's a long history of military and government and occupying forces and revolutions. And at the end of it, you may not have learned very much about the country itself. And I said, it'd be kind of interesting to have a museum that focused more on subjects, individual topics. And this museum, the Museum of Ho Chi Minh City, did that to a certain extent, or perhaps to a large extent. So there'd be an entire room about the arts and culture and music of Vietnam, then an entire room devoted to arts and crafts and handicrafts of Vietnam, and then another room devoted to the theater of Vietnam, then another to the currency and economics and financial systems of Vietnam over history. Things like that. So every room taught you about a different aspect of the culture of Saigon, of Vietnam in general. So I went there. It's all very near where I was staying in Saigon, in District 1. Easy walking distance between, say, the Independence Palace and the Museum of Ho Chi Minh City. They're very close together. And very similar to the other museums in that the building itself was a star of any visit. And this building has an unbelievable history. It was originally, let's go back to the very beginning. This is all on Wikipedia. So it was constructed in 1885 and completed in 1890. This was under the French, and was designed by French architect Alfred Fulhu, and it was built to house the Museum of Commercial Trade. But however, the building soon became the residence of the governor of Cochin, China. And then there's a World War II era. The Japanese invaded, took over, and the Japanese toppled the French colonial regime. And then this building, they keep calling it a palace. All these buildings are palaces for some reason, which confuses me. But anyway, they say, and the palace became the residence for Japanese Governor Yoshio Minoda. And then at some point, the Japanese handed over the palace to what they call the Puppet Empire of Vietnam. And then it became something else, and then it became something else, and then another historic period, it became something else, on and on. After the French reconquered Indochina after World War II. It became the provisional government of the state of Vietnam. Under the Republic of Vietnam, it became the temporary official residence of Diem, because Norodom Palace was still occupied by the French High Commissioner. So anyway, it just goes on and on and on. I think at one point it was the Supreme Court building, it was there. And then in the modern era, after the North Vietnamese communist invasion of South Vietnam, the Ho Chi Minh City People's Committee ordered that the former Supreme Court building be used as the Ho Chi Minh City Revolutionary Museum, later renamed to the Museum of Ho Chi Minh City. And that happened in 1999. So yeah, it's an amazing building to look at, has an incredible history. I think if you understand the history of that building, you have a good idea of the history of all of Vietnam, because it played a role in every period of history, of modern history, since the French were here during the French colonial times. And a key thing about this museum, or the building, is it has a wide stairway, like something you would see in a mansion of any kind, of very wealthy people, and they have a giant lobby. When you enter the building, you enter this huge high ceiling lobby, and then there'd be a big stairway with curving stairs going up to the upper floors. And apparently the lighting here is absolutely perfect for photography. So this staircase is a popular spot for wedding photography. And so for me, the visit to the museum had three elements I really enjoyed. One, of course, was the building itself, just seeing the architecture and exploring. And on the outside, of course, they had the Huey helicopter and fighter jets and tanks and artillery. All of those are around the outside of the building, so you can look at all of those. And they give a lot of history about that as well. So there's the building and the grounds. Then there, of course, is the contents of the museum itself, all the stuff I talked about, all the cultural exhibits about Vietnam and Vietnamese society. So that's all there. And then while you're there, you get to watch all of the wedding photography. Because when I was there, I think there must have been 5 different wedding groups there at the same time. And each one was like a little invading army. We're not talking about one guy with a little point and shoot camera and then a bride standing on the staircase. We're talking about a crew. They have like wardrobe changes, many cameras, lighting systems, a whole bunch of people. And they would all have to take turns posing on the staircase. And so you could stand there and watch all this wedding photography. It was quite fascinating to see. The grooms were there as well, but of course at a wedding, the groom is always an afterthought. It's all about the bride and her wedding dress and her makeup, and the whole building was so hot. I was there, and there was no air conditioning at all in this building. It was open to the outside world. My shirts and pants, whatever, were just soaked with sweat dripping down my face. And I kept thinking, how in the world are these women surviving in these conditions, dressed up in all of their finery with the makeup and their hair done just so, all of the jewelry, and then posing over and over, and then costume changes, wardrobe changes. How in the world are they not just melting? And how do they look so amazing in this heat? And then as I was going around the museum, I mean, you want to go from floor to floor, but quite often you couldn't go where you wanted to go because you need to go up the staircase, but you couldn't go up the staircase because it was in the middle of a photo shoot. So you try to go down a hallway to go to another smaller staircase, but the hallway would be jammed with the camera crew in there, the wedding photography crew, and then there would be a few other brides in there with all their bags around them with all their other wardrobe. And there would be people there. Their job was to hold these huge fans and just fan the bride just to keep her cool. I think they set up electric fans to blow on them. So it was a major job just keeping the brides nice and cool so that they could get nice pictures for their wedding photography. So that was all very, very entertaining. My favorite room at the museum, and I returned to it probably 3 times at least, was the very first room, a big exhibit, and it focused specifically on the economic history of Saigon as a shipping port. And that was very fascinating to look at. They had a lot of photography going back like the early 1900s, showing all of the rivers and the harbors and the ports. And it reminded me, for example, of the rivers that I saw in Bangladesh, with the riversides just covered in boats. These are the old style wooden boats, and then coolies just going in and out of the boats because they all had to be loaded and unloaded by hand, and men were paid by the day or by the bag to unload these ships. And then on the shoreline, there'd be piles and piles and piles of bags of rice with dozens of men stripped down to the waist carrying rice sacks, going back and forth on gangplanks, loading and unloading these boats. And then as time went on, the shipping and the commerce got bigger and bigger and bigger and more elaborate, bigger ships. And it focused very heavily on Saigon as a shipping port. And you got to see its history over time and its development. And they had a lot of maps and photography from those decades, as well as exhibits of all the various items that were used. And interestingly, there were exhibits of a lot of the buildings of Saigon, the old famous buildings. I took photographs of all of them, of course. And then as I was going through it, I noticed that the Bentan Market came up all the time, because there were photographs of the Bentan Market and then gave the history of the market building itself. And because I saw all of that history, it gave me the idea that after the museum, I should actually go to the Bentan Market. That's the big famous market in District 1. And everybody refers to it as now a tourist market. And everybody, when they talk to me about that market, again, as I said, it's always being called a tourist market. Well, that market is for tourists. But I found, because I went to the market myself, I went to look at it, and I found that dismissing it as a tourist market does it a big injustice. Because sure, it is really popular with tourists, and as you go through it as a foreigner, a lot of people are trying to sell you souvenir items, or coffee was a big deal there. Certain alleys inside the market, they really wanted to sell you bags of Vietnamese premium coffee beans to take home when you're there on holiday, and take some Vietnamese coffee back home when you leave. So people are trying to sell you a lot of these souvenirs and things like that. But at the same time, it's not an artificial environment at all. The whole market environment to me felt very real. The building is 100+ years old, fascinating to see, filled with places where you can get good Vietnamese food. And it's handy for a foreigner because they do cater to foreigners. They have menus in English, prices on display, and but all the classic Vietnamese dishes. So you can get good food there, good drinks, lots of things to look at. So it's a very interesting, exotic kind of market for a foreigner like me, even though it is called a tourist market. But you might, as I said, you might think, oh, that's just a tourist market. Why bother going to see it? It's going to be a bit fake. It's going to be commercialized. But no, I wouldn't think of it that way at all. I found it very interesting. And when I went there, I decided to have something to eat. What did I have now? I had some kind of a bowl of noodles while I was there that were very, very good, sitting at this little counter. And I also had delicious flan, because while I was sitting there, a rainstorm hit. So I was done my lunch and it was time to leave, but I couldn't go anywhere because the rain was coming down so hard. So I just settled in, and I had this kind of noodle dish of some kind, maybe beef noodles, and then I had giant like mango smoothie, one of my favorites. And then I still had time on my hands, and I noticed on all these photographs around me there was like a flan, you know, like a caramel flan dessert. And then when the woman was passing by where I was sitting at the counter, I got her attention and said, could I have one of those as well? And it was so good. It didn't look like the picture. Like on the picture, it looks like a custard with kind of a caramel, like a sauce poured over top of it. But what was delivered to me didn't look like that at all. It was just something in a cup. And you couldn't actually see the caramel sort of, or the pudding at the base. But as soon as you dug down underneath the sauce, oh, the pudding was down there. So even though it didn't look great, it tasted fantastic. And I really enjoyed that a lot. So I had a really good time at the market, and then I eventually left, and it was still pouring rain. So I was waiting at the gate, at the door to the market, waiting to go outside so I could go out, get out of there. I had to wait until the rain stopped enough, and then I could finally leave. So yeah, I spent a long time in the market. I went through all the way through with my GoPro, and then I went all the way through with my 360 camera. And again, I haven't edited any of that video. I haven't even had time to look at it. I have it, I have it, all this video carefully stored on 2 external hard drives like this. So I have 2 copies, 1 copy here and 1 copy on another hard drive. And yeah, I sure hope nothing happens to these and I lose all of that video. That would be, yeah, that would be heartbreaking. So yeah, here in Delad, I've actually been thinking about spending some money on another storage system, because I think what I need is an SSD drive, like an external solid state drive. And I can edit video on my laptop directly from the SSD drive, because I can't do it from these mechanical HDDs, hard disk drives. They're not fast enough, so I can't use these as source videos to edit, because you can't read video from this fast enough to edit or to export from or do anything. So we'll see. I definitely feel like I need more memory. I feel like I need one more copy, backup of a backup of a backup, because I get very nervous that I'm going to lose all of this video. If one of these drives fails, at least I have a second drive as a backup. But what if both of them fail? Yeah, who knows? And there's always the risk that you're busy copying and pasting new video files and you accidentally delete a bunch of old video, or you're busy copying video files from all your different memory cards, because I shoot video I shoot video probably on 5 different devices, 2 GoPros, 2 smartphones, and a 360 camera. And then I have to make sure I remember at the end of the day, okay, which cameras did I use? And I have to deliberately make sure I copy the video files one by one from each of those cameras and store them in properly labeled folders. And if you're feeling a bit tired and you're getting a bit impatient, you can make a mistake and you might forget like all of the video from my GoPro Hero 9. Maybe I just forgot to copy it. I lost track of it or something. And anyway, I suppose I have enough video that even if I lose a whole bunch of it, I have enough other video to keep me busy editing for a long time. So yeah, so that was that day. I think it consisted of the Museum of Ho Chi Minh City and then going to the Ben Thanh Market. I don't think I shot any more video after that day. So that was another behind. I think that was my last museum in Ho Chi Minh City. I'll end this behind the scenes video with one more story from my life in Saigon, a very short one, very easy one. This was actually the very next day after the Museum of Ho Chi Minh City, because I was doing something every single day in Saigon. So it was one day going to the Independence Palace. The very next day I went to the Museum of Ho Chi Minh City and the Ben Thanh Market. And the day after that, I did this experience. And it was a pretty laid back day, more or less, but it was all about coffee. because all of this time that I was in Saigon, a friend of mine from India was in Saigon, and we've been getting together quite a bit. We're both very fond of coffee, hanging out in cafes and having a good conversation. So a lot of my days in Saigon began with a cup of coffee with my friend. And on this particular day, I met up with him again, and we had coffee at Wayne's Coffee, which was one of the first places we went. It's at the VTEL Tower. I think that's the one we went to. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think we went there, had coffee there. But there was a little bit of a debate about where we should go, because a friend of his, who happens to be Vietnamese from Vietnam, was a little bit worried that my friend was only taking me to Western style coffee shops, because we were going to places like Wayne's Coffee, Highlands Coffee, Starbucks, Okio Cafe, and these are all very modern, relatively fancy coffee shops like you could go to in any Western country or any city around the world these days, of course, where you have air conditioning, comfortable seating, it's nice and quiet, good coffee, a modern coffee shop. And this friend of his knew that I was a YouTuber and I'm sort of interested in local life, and she kept telling him, hey, you should take this guy to a different type of coffee shop. Like, don't take him to Starbucks. Why are you going to Starbucks when you're in Vietnam? You should go here or there. And she was pointing out these more local, traditional Vietnamese coffee places. So on this particular day, there was a debate kind of going around between the two of them, and then I was sort of involved as well, about where we should meet for coffee, because his friend, I guess, was going to join us. And in the end, my friend and I, we ended up going to Wayne's Coffee, and it was just the two of us. So I had coffee there with my friend, and then afterwards I thought, well, why don't I do a coffee shop comparison? Because while we were talking about the different types of coffee shops, my friend's friend was sending links to traditional Vietnamese places, saying, you should bring him here, you should go there. So I had the address for one of these places, and it was called, what was it called? Cheo Leo, or something like that. And I decided to go from Wayne's Coffee. I said goodbye to my friend. He went off back to his own life, and I had the rest of the day to myself, and I got a Grab motorcycle. And then I went by Grab to Cheo Leo, which was a tiny Vietnamese traditional coffee shop in an alleyway. And I guess it's quite famous. Even it's quite famous amongst foreigners too. It's part of a tourism thing. It's known as a traditional Vietnamese coffee shop, and it's run by three sisters. And I guess a lot of tourists go there to have this experience. So I went there on this Grab motorcycle, and it was kind of what I expected, to be honest. It was small in a local neighborhood, so it had all of those elements that are positive, I guess, where it's local, it's traditional, you're in a local neighborhood with all of the local people. But there's also that comes with certain negative qualities too, assuming you think of intense, sweaty heat as a negative, because at least with a modern coffee shop, you've got air conditioning, and you go to one of these traditional Vietnamese neighborhood places, it's just open to the outside world, and whatever the temperature is out there, that's the same temperature it is on the inside. But I went in, and they had a big sign on the wall that broke down the entire traditional coffee making procedure, that used a kind of a bag, a cloth bag as a filter for the coffee to go through. And I guess they filter it 2 or 3 times, and they're using special clay pots and doing this and doing that. And they make a very flavorful, traditional Vietnamese coffee. So that is what I had there. And I sort of went there with the idea that I'm going to shoot this amazing video about the traditional Vietnamese coffee making style. But it didn't really work out that way for whatever reason. The mood wasn't quite right. I saw online, like on Google Maps, reviews for this place, and people talked about how, oh, the three sisters were so welcoming and so kind, and they showed us how they made the coffee. And I was sort of expecting almost a tour of the coffee shop. But it didn't really happen naturally. I think if I wanted to really show the place on video, exactly how they make the coffee and take video of the back area with the kitchen and the stove and the processing and the grinding of the beans, I would have had to have spoken to them and said, can I come back and make a video about everything? But I guess I wasn't really in the mood to do that. And just the whole environment of the place was really like just a place to sit down and have a coffee. It didn't feel, maybe it was just my mood, it just didn't feel like the right time to turn into Planet Doug filmmaker and insert myself. There was only one sister there. I didn't even know it was one of the sisters at the time. There just seemed to be this one woman rushing around, and she seemed a little bit harried and a little bit harassed, and there wasn't an opening for me to make a personal connection with her and kind of aim my GoPro in her direction and say, oh, I heard about your coffee shop. You're very famous. Can you tell me about the way you make your coffee and the history? There really wasn't an opening for me to do that. She was very busy. Everyone else at all the other tables, they were just people from the local neighborhood, men in particular, just having their morning coffee. And I was served my coffee. And the coffee itself, to be honest, wasn't really designed to please me other than as an example of a traditional coffee, because a traditional coffee is very small. It's just like an espresso almost, and it's not very hot. So it was served to me, and the way I drink coffee, it was sort of like, oh, coffee's gone. So now what do I do? The best thing about the place, to be honest, was the tea. Because you got your coffee, but in addition to your coffee, they served me a delicious cup of light tea, and you got a pot with lots more hot tea in it. So I was able to serve myself several glasses of this delicious hot tea. And for me, that was the highlight of the Vietnamese coffee experience. The highlight wasn't the coffee, the highlight was the tea. So I found that kind of interesting. So I took pictures of everything. Like, I didn't take very much video of the place, but I took a lot of pictures of all the stuff around the walls and things like that, and had my cup of coffee there. And then I finished up the day with walking from there back, all the way back to my hotel. And that was really interesting, because I tried to plot a route that took me through all these back alleyways. So I got to see a lot of the local neighborhoods, and I was shooting video the whole way and giving some commentary along the way, like, oh, look at that, that's so interesting, and oh, look at that, and oh, look at that, as I was walking around. And yeah, and then I walked down some main streets, went by a big hospital, some big market areas, and I found a big supermarket, like a co-op supermarket, and I'd been looking for one of those. And there I was able to stock up on my usual instant coffee, my Nescafe Gold, and my Coffee Mate milk, like powder Coffee Mate creamer for my coffee, and cornflakes and things like that. And that was pretty much the whole day. I don't think, until I watched the video, maybe I'm forgetting about entire sections of that day, but my videos tend to be about my day rather than about specific subjects. And that day consisted of coffee at Wayne's with my friend. I probably got there by Grab, so there'd be video of my Grab ride to get there, and then a Grab to go to the Cheo Leo traditional coffee shop, then video of walking through the neighborhood, the small alleyways, and then walking down the busy streets, going to the co-op supermarket to get all of my staples, and then walking from there back to my hotel. I suppose I remember now, yeah, the one interesting thing that happened was when I left from the co-op store and I'm walking down the streets, I was thinking about trying to find a garage with a high-powered air compressor, because I've been having I have nothing but technology problems, and one of the problems I'm having lately is that my Rode wireless microphone system, the power buttons don't respond. It just drives me crazy, because I'm often in a situation where I want to turn my camera on right away. I'm out in the city somewhere and I see something really interesting. Oh, I want to get video of that. So I fire up the GoPro and I'm trying to turn on my Rode wireless Go receiver, which I can't show it to you because it's plugged into the camera, but the power button won't respond. You're supposed to hold it down for 2 seconds and then it'll power up, but you hold it down, nothing happens. And it's one of those things where you have to wiggle the power button around. You kind of got to push it this way, hold it down for 2 seconds. Didn't work. Push it this way, hold it down for 2 seconds. Wiggle it around a little bit. Push it this way, push it that way. I haven't found the magical combination of wiggles and pressing to get the darn thing to respond. Sometimes it takes 2 minutes. Sometimes it takes 5 minutes. Sometimes I can never get it to turn on. And I sent an email to Rode. I went onto their website and told them about this problem I'm having. Is there anything you guys can tell me? How can I fix this? And I felt justified in sending them the email because this has happened with all of my Rode microphones. I started off with this set. This was the very first set of Rode microphones. This is the microphone transmitter and the receiver, and they both have the identical power buttons and they won't respond. As long as I've had these, I'll hold down the power button and nothing will happen. And I got to push the button to the left, nothing happens. Push it to the right, push it up, push it down. And I just keep playing with it and playing with it until it finally turns on. Then I got to go to the receiver and do the same thing. Finally it turns on. And for microphone systems that cost hundreds of dollars, you kind of expect better, right? And then they came out with the Rode Wireless Go 2, the set that I'm using now, which had a lot of improvements over the first set. The biggest improvement is that you now have 2 microphones that attach to one receiver, which is why I spent the money and bought it, so that I can have a microphone, and if I'm hanging out with a friend of mine, I can put a microphone on him, and we're both being recorded on separate microphones. And I bought a set at a store at Alltech Camera in Kuala Lumpur, and then I was very happy. I brought it back to my hotel, and they wouldn't turn on. Just would not turn on. Couldn't get it to work. The receiver, you can hold down the power button, you can wiggle it as much as you want. I could not get the darn thing to turn on. So basically I had to go back to the camera store and convince them to give me a new set under warranty because the darn thing wouldn't work. And of course, when I brought it back to Alltech, the guy grabbed the receiver and then he did what I was talking about. He uses the wiggle technique and he pushed the button this way and this way and that way and that way. Oh, and he got it to turn on. So he tried to convince me, no, look, it works. It's fine. What are you talking about? You know, go away. Because he wants me to go away. They don't want the hassle of replacing it. So he's trying to convince me that it's not defective. But of course what I did is I turned it off and I said, okay, watch this. Now I have it on. I have it off. I mean, I'm holding down the power button. Nothing. Push it to the left. Nothing. Right. Nothing. Like, there is a problem. This thing, the power button will not respond. And then I gave it back to him and then he tried, and yeah, he couldn't get it to turn on that time. He kept trying and trying and trying. Finally, we got it to turn on, but he agreed with me that, yeah, okay, there's something wrong here. And then they gave me a brand new set and sent that set back to Rode or back to the distributor. And then I got this set and now it's doing the same thing. It takes me forever to turn on the receiver. So when I sent the email to Rode, I basically told them, like, I'm not talking about a one-off problem. I bought 3 separate Rode Wireless Go sets from you guys, and all 3 had defective power buttons. So there's something wrong with your power buttons. I'm telling you. But anyway, throughout all of this, I've been looking for solutions. You go onto the forums and you find out all these other people that are having the same problem. And of course, they're all trying different ways to fix the problem. Oh, just do this and it fixes the problem. Just do this, do that. You try all of those things and of course it never works for you. But one thing that somebody said was what they did was they got an air can. Like you use air cans to blast dust out of electronics, out of keyboards and things. And then he used that to blast air in and around the power buttons, kind of wiggling it around and trying to perhaps, like maybe the power button isn't working because there's dust and dirt in there preventing it from making contact. So I don't have any of these cans of compressed air, but I thought maybe a garage would have it. And as I was coming back from these various coffee shops, walking to my hotel, I happened to pass this little garage, and there was a guy out on the road, out on like the sidewalk and the entrance to the garage, and he had a big air compressor, and he was blasting dirt and leaves and garbage away from his store. He was basically cleaning the sidewalk, blasting it with air. So I thought, oh, maybe he can do it for me. So anyway, I stopped and talked with the guy, and I got out my Rode Wireless Go receiver, and I indicated to him, like, hey, can we use that air compressor to blast air at this button? So the two of us worked together and holding onto the receiver and moving the button around to open up the edges, and then just blasting as much as we could. I was worried that I was probably damaging the microphone at this point. I'm probably going to break it because those air compressors, they blast air hard. So you can actually break things by doing that, but the thing hardly worked at all anyway, so I thought I've got nothing to lose. And in the end, it didn't help, so I didn't fix it. But yeah, that was another small adventure I had when I was going back to my hotel, and I think that was the end of that day, I believe. I can't remember anything else that happened.